Hi, this is Sumit Srivastava, a federated chess player and professional chess coach. So now we have arrived at a very important and interesting topic, and that is the topic of planning. We are just going to be looking at the basics of planning, and in future we will eventually discuss the more advanced aspects of planning. First thing to say is that planning in chess is a crucial skill that we need to develop. We need to not only prepare plans, but also we need to understand how that process occurs. We need to be a good planner over the chessboard. As all of us make plans in our day to day lives, so we all know what planning is. It's in essence a series of interconnected actions with a particular goal in mind, a goal that will benefit us if we manage to achieve it. So, design that plan and then we go about trying to carry out the plan. The real question is, how do we design a plan? How do we figure out what is the best way to proceed with this set of interconnected actions that represent the plan? And the answer to this is, in one word, evaluation. We want to examine the position on the board, and the position on the board itself will tell us what are the best subsequent moves. Sometimes the position is really complex and imbalanced, and in those circumstances, it can be very difficult to identify the right course of action, the right plan. Sometimes there are positions where more than one plan is available, and it's hard or even impossible to know which course of action is the best. Grandmasters spend countless hours, days, sometimes even weeks trying to figure out the essence of a particularly complex position so that they can arrive at a good plan. Fortunately for us, in this section, we are not going to pick incredibly complicated examples. Instead, we are just going to begin with this. I think very nice example taken from a game between two grandmasters of the past, Capablanca with the white pieces and Tartakov with the black. So in this position, it's black to move, and he played the move pawn to d5. Now Capablanca comes up with a very nice plan. He captures on d5, black recaptures on d5. Now white needs to do something about the attack on his queen, and he has two choices, two course of actions. He can retreat the queen or he can capture the rook and consequently exchange one set of rooks and the queens. Capablanca decided that he would capture the rook because he came up with a very strong plan from this position. His plan has to do with the move pawn to h5, breaking up the kingside pawn structure. Now very simply we can say, okay, his plan is just to attack a pawn on g6. This is not much of a plan. This is just an individual move. But in fact, it is much more than this. Because if we go back one move, we look at this position, we see that Capablanca must have evaluated this position and seen first of all that the material is level, but in an endgame, passed pawns are extremely important. And he must have noticed that here white has a kingside pawn majority. So this is the area of the board where he can potentially create a passed pawn. The next aspect in Capablanca's planning is that black's two pawns on the king's side are both on a light square. Capablanca has a bishop, a light square bishop, as compared to black's knight. The final characteristic I want to draw your attention to of this position is that each side has a set of rooks, and currently neither rook is doing an especially good job. So Capablanca would like to activate his rook, but there aren't so many open files or even semi-open files in this position. If, for example, Capablanca brought his rook to b1, well, it's really of no use. If he went to e1, black could contest that file. So part of Capablanca's great plan, with this idea of first exchanging rooks and queens and then immediately breaking with the move h5, is that after the response rook to f6, defending the pawn exchanged on g6, we can see that white has succeeded in opening up a file, and sure enough, white's next move is rook to h1. So we see all of his actions, who is a great endgame master, are interconnected and are working towards a particular goal. Black went king to f8, and now white played rook to h7. Black went rook to c6. It's showing us that there is a very important thing to keep in mind always when it comes to plans. And that is, we are not the only ones who are making plans. Chess is like a game of war. And let's say each side is the commander in chief. Each side is making a plan. And so, it is also a part of planning to anticipate the plans of our opponent and take measures against them. White here continues his own plan, pawn to g4. And now black decides that he won't capture the pawn on c3, because doing so would drop the pawn on g6, and these two pawns would be far too strong. So he goes knight to c4. And now Capablanca continues to push his pawns. Here his opponent played knight e3 check. White went king to f3, and probably best was knight to d1. But understandably his opponent went knight to f5, because this way he was hoping to reduce the pressure on that g6 pawn. However, this allows white to play bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, and now white has succeeded in creating what we call a passed pawn clearly, but also a protected passed pawn. Now white plays the move king to g3. Anticipating the capture of c3, black captures the pawn, and now white plays king to h4, and black goes rook to f3. Again, rook to f3 is a smart practical choice of white, because white's plan is to push the pawn, then move forward, and given enough time, white could create two connected passed pawns. And this is simply too much. So black tries to get rid of at least one of them, of course. White had already seen this far. Plays g6, and black plays rook takes f4 with check. White goes king to g5, and black goes rook to e4. And now white goes king to f6. This is very typical idea that leverages the vulnerable placement of the black king. We have the white king on f6 and the black king on f8, and so rook h8 is a huge threat. Black has to go king to g8, check, king to h8, rook takes c7. Now once again, this back rank mate is a big problem for black. So rook to e8 is necessary. And now white simply collects the pawn on f5. The dust has more or less settled in this position. And we see that material is equal, however, black's position is completely hopeless. Because the advanced pawn on g6 is extremely strong. The king for white is much better placed than black's king. And the white rook here on the 7th rank pressuring on a7 and also potentially covering squares like g7 and h7 is simply too strong. Well, what actually happened? Why did Capablanca won this game? In fact, the closer study shows us that chances were approximately equal. The difference was that Capablanca's plan was ultimately a stronger plan than Tartakover's plan. So let's recap. The first thing that we can say is plans are a sequence of interconnected actions with a specific goal in mind. However, it's not only us that we will have a plan, but if we are up against strong opponents, they will have very clear plans as well. And therefore, any planning we do, we must take into account the plans of our opponents that sometimes will call for a particular type of action or move which is known as prophylaxis or a prophylactic move. What this means is any move that anticipates the threats or plans of our opponent and tries to prevent those plans from being carried out if we consider them too dangerous to allow. Then we need to be clear that in order to create a strong plan, we must have a strong understanding of the position. And in order to do that, we need to carefully evaluate any given position. So I hope you liked and enjoyed this video with the topic how to plan, covering the basics of planning. We'll meet you in next video with another interesting topic. Thanks for watching.